Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Welcome to the second part of this whole could somebody theoretically survive in the Tactics Ogre universe thing. So either way, there was at least a couple folks that were interested in seeing a follow-up, so let's go ahead and start off with the earliest game in the series here with Knight of Lotus. And as with all things Knight of Lotus related, this is by far going to be everyone's happiest outcome, seeing as our rates of survival within the first 24 hours are better than 50%. Hooray! So, that being said, let's go ahead and discuss this here. Now, again, as with last time, I'm going to go ahead and assume a couple of things. We have two initial outcomes. A, you're just some random shipwreck survivor that happens to show up somewhere on the coast, anywhere along this island, or you happen to be body swapped with Alphonse in this particular situation. And both of those end up working out just fine, probably, maybe. So, first of all, now I said 50%, right? So the thing is, it's probably more like 75%. Depends on kind of the season that you end up showing up here. If you end up showing up anytime other than winter, 75% of this island, if you just land up on the shore, you'll probably end up at a place that's relatively accepting of outsiders. They're not super hostile towards each other in all directions, and generally stuff is fine unless, you know, you're an actual threat to the powers that be here, which you're not. So basically, you'd just be fine. You would just kind of be living in the whole medieval setting, obviously, so that'd be an adjustment. But seeing as we see no differences in language even between people and mermaids, it seems like everything's going to be just fine there. We see that the forests are allegedly full of fairies. We see that there's beasts wandering about, but realistically speaking, alright, sorry, random cough there. So, basically, it seems like you would probably be just fine. The locals seem to be pretty okay in most directions. The folks that are actually running the island seem to be actually concerned with running the island more than, like, randomly massacring people. Even if we're getting here either before or after the conflict, honestly, both of those situations end up just fine. The only time that Naris is going completely nuts on random people, which is usually just his own personal soldiers, seems to mostly just kind of be in his little circle. Realistically, the everyday people here, they probably would not be terribly affected by this. In fact, most of the conflicts that actually happen through Knight of Lotus are specifically because Alphonse is from Lotus. Realistically, the populace here, while there are some disputes, they do not necessarily seem to be actively going out of their way to go on huge campaigns against each other or anything. Most of that is a ruse. With one exception, and that's actually the other 25% of the island that a random boat may land on, and that is the mermaids. Realistically, those would kill you on sight, but still, those odds are pretty darn good. And that being said, they kind of end up being okay anyway. Now, second option then, let's go ahead and assume that you end up winding up in the same place as Alphonse did. Let's just say that he gets thrown in the ocean and you pop out instead. They probably won't question it too much. And realistically speaking, you'll probably end up getting saved by Eleanor in that case anyway, because, mermaids just, or Brevra is just kind of there going and fishing somebody out of the ocean, and in that case, it just happens to be you instead. So what ends up happening? Realistically, you have an opening right then and there to just go and join the clergy, I guess. Father Hammond there is kind of an ass, but it's a living, I guess, or at least an existence. From there, you might potentially go off and probably just end up going and maybe finding some work in Skibellum or something and just making a life for yourself. Permanent residences seem to be perfectly available all over the place. Markets seem to be working fine. Stuff is a bit emptier in Skibellum there, though it's mostly emptied out, again, because Lotus is there. So, without them necessarily intervening, like, we're going to assume, in this particular case, that since Richter doesn't have enough people, he probably would end up screwing everything up. There's a non-zero chance he just ends up getting himself killed in the Ghost Forest over here, or potentially he ends up getting himself got by Naris down the road, which honestly, even that would probably be an okay outcome, because then all of a sudden, Lotus and this island are probably on okay terms, even if he's the one being controlled. We know from the worst ending of the game here that Lotus never really bothers to send any backup one way or the other. Like, nobody's coming out here. It's basically just like some random island in the middle of nowhere. They've got some resources, but it's not worth losing people over. And mostly this was just a way for two kids to basically prove themselves on a small campaign. So like, best case to worst case scenario, right? So, starting at the worst case scenario, we get the worst ending. Somehow Richter makes it all the way to Angel's headstone. Let's just say Ivana went with them for whatever reason, and he ends up getting completely just crushed there. Somehow Richter and like both routes just end up getting paired up, right? They make it all the way to Angel's headstone, and they end up getting got. And in that particular situation, the entire island basically goes Silent Hill mode. But even then, like, they say that it's covered in a thick fog, but they don't really elaborate on what that means. Like, they don't say that everything died specifically. It's just, it's all foggy now, which means that we probably have all kinds of demonic stuff living all over the place. But if we learned anything from Ogre Battle 64, they're perfectly fine making little functional communities for themselves. They just happen to be technically evil, not necessarily, like, evil about it, if that makes sense. So there's a non-zero chance. Everything's fine. It's just more foggy. You've created London. Congratulations. Now, best case scenario, somehow they end up winning. Ivana and Richter celebrating their new victory, go become the new king and queen. We have a spy lady who just kind of goes and sacrifices herself in this situation. Why can I never remember her name? I don't know. And we have, Ninja Buddy that's just sort of around now. In that particular scenario, the place is, again, just perfectly fine, perfectly peaceful. It retains autonomy from Lotus, so you're still going to be fine. It's like, before the conflict, you're fine. Any of the endings, you're fine. Realistically, Ovis is probably a great place to be in. Unless you wash up near the mermaids, in which case they'll probably kill you. But still, like, the mermaids are such a minor issue for anyone here. Realistically, Naris, if he ends up winning, somehow he probably would just end up dealing with the mermaids or something. With Richter and Ivana, I would assume they probably would subjugate them too, maybe make peace, it's unclear. If bad ending happens, they're probably not going to be much of an issue. So it's weird how, objectively, the scariest thing in here is, the mermaid sanctuary. You do have some of the wandering beasts around the center of the island, but it does seem like that stuff is relatively easy to avoid. Like, realistically, this whole section of the island, you can ignore most of this. Like, Uradella actually is a little bit funny to me because, like, geographically, everything else makes sense. Uradella's weird because they've got this weird hostile swamp that people have to go through. They could have just moved it over here. I know it's here probably just for, like, gameplay pacing purposes, but that one always seemed odd to me. Because, like, Beleza's an abandoned fort, which makes sense because, they were basically fighting the mermaids at one point. Uradella feels like it was maybe a leftover from that time or something. Because it's kind of just a weird placement for it. You'd think that they would have moved the port closer to here so that they don't have to go through all the scary stuff over here. Because basically, it's like hostile mermaids all over the place, and then we've also got hostile dragons and beasts and things. Which, granted, we have that over here in the volcano too, but it is what it is. Now, actually, yeah, you probably don't want to go live near the active volcano. That's also a thing. But yeah, so realistically, I would say your odds of surviving here, probably fantastic. Generally speaking, this has always been the most peaceful setting in the series. The conflict is the lowest stakes by far, comparatively speaking. It does have that whole, heaven and hell war thing as always, but realistically, even if Shaher ends up winning this thing, this is just his, like, personal party palace all of a sudden. Like, he doesn't really expand beyond that, He doesn't start some creeping evil or something. He just wanted a home. So, everything's fine regardless. Anyway, so yeah, that's about that. So, y'all have yourselves a good one. We'll see you in the next one. Bye.